Welcome to the first of our videos for Year 10 Science, and we're going to be starting off with a study of genetics, and the very first thing we're going to look at is the structure of our DNA. So for each one we're going to have a set of different learning objectives. This includes key terms that we need to know and the different things that we should know by the end of this lesson. So for this lesson we want to understand what a cell is, where the nucleus is, what DNA, nucleotides, nitrogen bases and complementary base pairs are, and all of these will be found in your flashcards that have been linked in our Teams to Quizlet. So you can study those there and we'll go through the meaning of those as we go through. The other thing that we need to be able to do is to state the location of DNA in cells, describe its structure and the role of DNA, understand the sequence of bases in DNA gives rise to genetic diversity, so all the different traits that we see in all different types of organisms and individuals. Be able to write a complementary strand when given a sequence of DNA bases, and to draw a diagram that illustrates the basic structure of a nucleotide and how this links to DNA structure. So let's get started. First of all is just a little bit of a review on cells. Now, pretty much everyone should remember what a cell is. Just getting our definitions right is really important and using the right terminology. So we need to remember that cells are the basic building blocks of all life. Okay, so pretty much if anything is alive, it consists of cells. It may be unicellular or multicellular, but it's going to consist of cells. That's if it's a plant, animal, or otherwise. The functions of the cells allow us to have different bodily functions. So different cells do different things, but these include respiration, okay, so being able to breathe, growth, reproduction, excretion, pretty much anything that our body does, it requires cells to do. So the transferring of brain impulses, the ability for our muscles to twitch, those kinds of things. Okay, so there's many different structures within a cell which allow the cells to do their particular roles, and the nucleus is the one that we're most concerned about when we're talking about DNA, because the nucleus controls and coordinates the functions of the cell. It's where all the information that tells the cells how to behave and what to do is stored. So inside the nucleus, we find our DNA. So DNA is short for deoxyribonucleic acid. So we get the D and A from each of those. And it has a similar structure in all organisms. Some organisms have more, some have less, but its structure is pretty much the same. It's usually a long string-like structure that is almost invisible except for when it's being replicated when the cells are dividing. But it's basically like tiny, tiny little threads all throughout the nucleus of the cell. And that's because it's so long. So when the DNA actually forms in this double helix structure like this, it actually winds itself up into supercoils, and then these supercoiled strands of DNA become what we call chromosomes. We need to understand the chemical structure of DNA, so let's get started looking at that. DNA is made up of nucleotides. Okay, so we have DNA, and then DNA is made up of nucleotides. So there are different nucleotides that come together to give us all the different forms of DNA. The nucleotide itself, there are 4 different nucleotides, and this is because we have a sugar. So we have a sugar, which is the deoxyribo sugar, and then attached to that is a phosphate group. Okay, so and if you've done any chemistry, you may remember that phosphate's actually PO4 3-. This is bonded in such a way to the sugar that it makes it negatively charged along this bit where the phosphate is. And then we have one of 4 nitrogen bases. So this overall structure here is an nucleotide. So the base connects to the sugar, and then the phosphate connects to the sugar as well. So the sugar sits in the middle, and we make up these 4 different nucleotides. And this is the picture of it here, better than my scribbling. Okay, so again, we can see that we have the sugar, the phosphate, and the base. And the sugar is usually, it's a 5-membered ring, so it looks like a pentagon. So once we have each of our nucleotides, the way that they are arranged causes our DNA to form a twisted ladder structure, what we call a double helix, where we have 2 nitrogen bases forming a pair which come together to form the rungs on the ladder, and then the phosphates actually form this backbone along here, along the outside of each one. So the uprights of the ladder are the alternating phosphate and sugar groups, then the rungs are formed by the nitrogen bases. So the 4 bases that we have in DNA are adenine, thymine, guanine, and cytosine. We abbreviate these by giving them the symbol that corresponds to the first letter of their name, so A, T, G, and C. You may see some other ones like uracil, U, used, but it is only in RNA, not in DNA, and we're only looking at DNA in our Year 10 studies this year. So each of these 4 bases can arrange itself in a different sequence, and then they actually pair up. So when they pair up, we refer to it as a base pair, and A always pairs to T and G always pairs to C. When they do this, we refer to them as complementary base pairs. Sorry. There we go. So each base has a different chemical structure, so they can only pair up in one way. Okay, so as I said before, adenine only pairs with thymine and guanine only pairs with cytosine. So if we have a DNA structure that says A, T, T, G, G, C, A, we can then predict what the other strand would be, the complementary strand, because if A only ever pairs with T, then the opposite strand must be T, A, and if G only ever pairs with C, then it must go C, C, G, T. Okay, so we have the original strand, and then this is what we call the complementary strand, because remember, our DNA is double-stranded, and the 2 strands will always be a complement of each other. So the base pairs will always match up in that exactly same way. Okay, so that's it that we need to know for the first bit about our structure of DNA. So what I want you to do now is to review the success criteria that we outlined at the beginning of this. Make sure you've taken notes on the names and names of each of the bases and how they pair up and the overall structure of DNA, its location and its function. And then I want you to make sure that all your notes are tidy, you've loaded them into your class notebook or taken them in your class notebook, and then complete the quick quiz that's at the end of this lesson. Okay, I'll see you in class.